Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me as always is Ken. How are you doing today, Ken?
I'm well, thank you for asking, Rory. I'm grateful to be here looking at today's episode through the frame of gratitude. This is episode 212 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and today we kick off with our Counselling Foundations, where we recognise that the foundations, the basics of counselling and which we build our practice are so important, and it's important that they are strong. And today we're going to be looking at a skill in counselling, and that is the skill of summarising. And I have it on very good authority that there may be an extra added dimension to this one. We then move on to focus on self. That's the part where we recognise that we as the practitioner, we form the heart of our practice, and we need to look at our own lives and how we show up in our practice to be well enough to be in service of others. And today we're going to be looking at managing our personal relationships, what can come up during counselling training or thereafter for us in our personal lives. And then we go on to practice matters, where we dip our toe into the pool that is practice. We look at different presentations that may come along in practice, different ways of looking at that, professional items of how we run our practice. And today we have a special guest lecturer, and that is Michelle Harrison-Lee. Rory met up with Michelle Harrison-Lee, and she speaks about psychosexual therapy. Really interesting topic, so make sure you stick around for that. But let's get into those really important, vitally important foundations, Rory, that underpin what we do as counsellors. And skills, of course, are the bread and butter of any counsellor. It doesn't matter what your modality is, you're going to be practicing some form of skills, and summarising is non-modality specific. We will all summarise.
It's true, Ken. It's true. And I think I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I sometimes think that when skills are taught, they may not be taught like you would teach instruments in an orchestra. Mm-hmm. And they're sometimes used, and sometimes, certainly when we taught counselling, we could see students using them. It was a bit of a cacophony. And what we had to do was kind of be like conductors in an orchestra and conduct them and get them to use them in harmony. And I think that the skill of summarising is a harmony skill. You see what I did there, Ken?
I like
that.
It's
a harmony skill. And of course, it's traditionally used at the end of a session or a series of sessions to summarise most of the content, so the client can go away with an idea of what's been discussed and some ideas maybe to think about between the sessions, and maybe things even to work on. But here's the thing, Ken. I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, or I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I think the skill of summarising is a wide skill, and it differentiates between paraphrasing in this way. Paraphrasing brings depth, so you can paraphrase back and reflect back, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's real processing a paraphrase. With summarising, it's a wider skill. So it's wider, and that is how you have to use it in context. I don't think, and I may be wrong, that summarising is a true process skill. It is a way of collating all the information so a client can go away and yes, feel they heard, but also have maybe some things to think about. But processing skills, things like reflecting and paraphrasing, where the person is really going deep into emotions, are very narrow skills. Don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ken, because I know we've never discussed it.
We haven't, and I think that this is the joy of what we do, in that we get together, two peers, and we discuss a topic. And I'm with you. I'm in your camp. As you were saying it, I'm I guess a visual learner in many ways, and the way I see the counselling presentation or what a client brings in, I see that as a narrative that kind of runs along, and underneath that narrative is like a river that flows, and that river that flows underneath the narrative, underneath the story that they bring, is the emotions and feelings. And it's not the story that brings them into counselling. It's the feelings that they have within. And using paraphrasing, it kind of focuses down on an area that they brought, and it keys down, like you say, it goes into depth, and it goes through the narrative, and it keys in to the flow that is underlying that. Reflecting and paraphrasing both do that. So I see the depth that you're talking about there. Now, when we look at summary, it spans a longer time frame. And it brings the breadth, as you're saying, Rory. So you've got the depth going down, and then you've got the breadth or the width of what is being brought. And it kind of ties things together. It summarizes and brings the story together. And I guess in many ways shows the speaker that we as the listener within that relationship have heard them, and that we kind of can summarize back what they've been bringing to us, showing that we've been paying attention and we've been there with them along that road. And I like that you've brought that in as being a width, Rory. What would a summary do? What does it really do?
Well, I think what a summary does is give you it's a map of where you've travelled.
Oh yes.
Throughout the engagement, whether that is a single session or a number of sessions. And I'll share with the listener that when I had my counselling a couple of years ago, I went back to have some therapy. My therapist summarised at the end. However, at the end of all the sessions, she gave me a written summary of what was discussed. And I found that mightily helpful. I also found it mightily creative because it's something I'd never thought of. And at the end, she said, I've written a summary of what we discussed. And I said, oh, okay. And she gave it me, and I still have it. It still knocks around. And what was useful about that was I'm able to look at it and go, ooh, that's changed a little bit. That's shifted a little bit. And ooh, I don't do that anymore. Now, I'm sure that if she'd have reflected back verbally, I may have forgotten. We tend to forget things, don't we? You know, humans do forget things. But having it written down, very, very useful. And also, and this is the key thing, having it written down was very, very impactful because I was looking at the words, not listening to me recite it in my mind. So a skill of summary really is a map of where you've traveled therapeutically, either in a single session or in a series of encounters. And like with any map, you may want to kind of think, oh, I kind of like the view on that piece of the map. I'll just go there. Or you might think, oh gosh, that was mightily scary. You know, maybe I need some help again just to go and engage with that part of the map. Well, like climbing a mountain, you know, you look at the map and you think, oh gosh, it's a great mountain. I'd love to climb it, but I think I'm going to need a bit of help. So it really is very useful. Is it a topography of the session where you're looking at it in a map in relief and you can see it? Mightily helpful. But yes, as I said at the top of the piece, it's not a depth skill, it's a width skill.
I like it. I see a summary as a gift, and I think that the way you described as receiving the written summary, through the perception of the therapist you work with who was in your frame of reference receiving that, it's a gift. It's a gift that you look at today. You'll get it out and revisit it and have another look at it. And, you know, when a narrative is coming our way, when that client is talking, very often they are putting into words what they're feeling inside and what is going around and round in their head. And so often those stories can just go round and round and round in the head. Just in speaking that out, it changes the direction and or the power of that story, and it infuses with the feelings, and it comes out into the therapy room, and it's perceived by an empathic other, the therapist, who receives that and then gives it back to the client, beautifully wrapped up in how they understood it in walking that road with that person. And it's a beautiful gift because it's taking what you've been feeling, what's been going on in your head, and receiving it back in the words of another, beautifully summarized and wrapped up almost like with a little bow. That's how I kind of see a summary. It's almost a gift that is given to the client at the end of a session or a series of sessions. And sometimes you may even put a summary in partway through some sessions as a review. A review is a great time to put in a summary of what we've discussed and where we may go, and pointing in both directions within the relationship. Now, I like how you've used the map. I like how you've said that you can kind of look at that and go, oh, maybe I need to go a little bit deeper over there. Or look where I've come from there. That is really, really good. And another thing that it kind of shows us is that if we've got it wrong as the therapist, that summary is an opportunity for that client to go, actually, not that bit though. You know, when you've said that bit there, it's not really like that, it's like this. And it gives us an opportunity to readjust our frame of reference if we've missed something or misinterpreted something, or if we've received it in a different way than it was intended by the client, or even if we have reflected it back as the client said it, but they are now hearing it differently because it's not in their head anymore, it's coming back in another's words. They can even look at it and go, actually, it's not really like that, even if it was their intention when bringing that in. So it's a really powerful skill. It's a beautiful skill to wrap up. And I might say that if you are using a summary, which is customary to put at the end of a session to kind of wrap up what we've done, to give that map of that session, to go into that width of what the session was before that client leaves, always leave a little bit of time after it for the client to reflect on that, maybe to correct something if they feel that we might have misheard or misunderstood that. Or it might be an opportunity, as you said, Rory, for them to identify something they might want to bring at another session. Oh yeah, you know what, when we're looking at it now, I think I need to do a bit more work on my mum. I wonder if I can bring that in our next session.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And you know what? If I ever decided to re-engage with therapy, I would take that summary written by my former therapist back to my new therapist as a starting point. That was the map that I left with. And I would take it back and I'd say, you know, this is what I discussed in my last therapy encounter. And, you know, these are the things that have changed, but maybe these are the things that have altered that I want to look at. It's such a valuable tool. And I can't say enough. I never, ever considered, because I don't particularly like writing things down because I'm dyslexic, not a great writer of things. But I would certainly, if a client wanted to, make the effort just to give them a written summary at the end, as something they can take away. They've got a little map in their pocket, written by them. I mean, they narrated the view. I just wrote down what they said. And then if they ever go to therapy again, they could look at it and go, you know, that's changed. I think summarizing is a fantastic skill for reflection at distance.
Oh, I like that.
So that when the client is kind of thinking either in between the sessions, you know, because we know a lot of change, movement, and process goes on in between sessions. So either in between sessions or at the end of a series of encounters, they can have a look. And you know, the truth of the matter is, maybe even through a series of encounters, some things are still prominent. Some difficulties are still there that can happen, and it gives the person the opportunity to look at that and say, well, I did a little bit of work on that, but you know, maybe I need to see how that goes and re-engage with therapy at some point. And you know, maybe that's a starting point. Very, very useful map of our emotional journey through the arc of therapy.
I love that. You've just used such beautiful words to describe what is in fact a summary, and a summary is really a summary. But when we're talking about counselling skills, they're often not as they immediately appear. So if you were doing a summary of a book, for instance, you would summarize the story of the book. There it is. But when we're doing a summary and using that as a counselling skill, it's not just the story that we're summarising. We are touching in on the emotions that have presented as well. And I think that's the skill, the real skill in a summary, is capturing the essence of what the person brought by going beyond the narrative, or you said this and then you said that and then you brought this and then you said that. That would be a very basic summary. And maybe as we kind of start learning counselling skills and practicing them with our peers during our studies, that's how we might summarize back. But a seasoned counsellor, somebody with the wisdom of many years of practice, would be summarizing back and really handing the emotions as part of the words that are given. So those words would be the narrative, but they would be so intertwined with the emotions. So that as this client leaves, and as you said, Rory, so often the process is between sessions, they leave with this neat little package. When they look at it, they can, yes, see their story. They know that somebody really listened to them, bothered to really hear them, and reflect that back so they know they've been heard. And there's these little invite mats that are strewn across this summary, little invite mats of maybe I can go a little bit deeper here, maybe I can look at that. I'm so glad I managed to overcome that. It really is a powerful, powerful skill. I think all the counselling skills are powerful. And I often say, Rory, we talk about basic counselling skills and an advanced counselling skill. And I've been thinking about this recently, and I don't know that there is an advanced counselling skill. And I know that some skills do fall into the advanced category. So before we get all the letters in, I'll put that in there. But I think the skill of silence is an advanced counselling skill in the hands of a seasoned professional counsellor who has the experience and wisdom to go behind what may be perceived as a basic counselling skill of just being quiet, and all the counselling skills, it's the advancedness comes from the practitioner. The skills are the skills, and we all practice them and identify them as the self, but the deeper the relationship, the more empathic we are able to be, the more in tune with the client we are able to be, then the more advanced the use of the skill.
Yes, and I'd second that, Ken. It's not, the skills aren't the advanced part, it's the use and delivery of them.
Yes.
That's the key element here. So it's like having a guitar. If I had a guitar in my arms, the guitar is the guitar, and it would sound awful because I cannot play the guitar. But if you give it to someone who can play the guitar, and there's the skill. It's the skill of using the skill, not particularly the skill. And when we're thinking of summarizing, it's really interesting. I've just done another piece of personal development work, and we were asked to summarize ourselves in our own words. Ooh. And that was really, really interesting because that was really person-centered. It wasn't therapy. I had some coaching. And what happened was I found myself writing stuff down. And as I'm writing them, I'm going, oh, right, yes. It was one of those, it was a very, very strange sensation of having to think about the session and then writing down in my own words. And the person who's working with me said, so this is what you're saying, Rory? I'm saying, yes, this is what I'm saying. And I have to wonder, I left that encounter thinking, I wonder if that would work in therapy. Just to ask, depending on the client, some clients may be not in a state where they could recollect. But I think there's a principled argument to say, you could say to a client, if you were to summarize this session and where you are now, what would that be? And they could say, well, I've looked at this and I've decided that. And that adds to the collaboration and the empowerment within the relationship. I felt very empowered. Yeah,
I love how you've linked that into that personal development and recognizing the development in self. And I guess in a way, journaling is a way of us summarizing where we might have been that day, what we might have felt that day, or what we might have felt the day before if we do our journaling in the morning. And I like it. I like the idea of handing that over to a client, Rory. Ooh, there's so much that's unlocking here. And you can also unlock Rory's super duper handout on summarizing, and you can get that but it's free of charge. You just go to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. It's 2 L's in counselling, based in the UK. 2 L's in the spelling of counselling in the UK. 1, I believe, in the US, Rory. We like the L so much, we put 2 in here. Go to the website, counsellingtutor.com. Top menu bar, click on podcasts, find episode 212. Right there on that page, you can download Rory's super duper handout on summarising. It's in beautiful PDF format and beautifully designed as well. Go and get it.
You're missing out if you don't. It's a thing of beauty. It's a summary. It's actually a summary of what we've been
summarising.
talking about.
Yes.
Summarising.
Yes, frame it. Put it on your wall. I'm getting a bit carried away now. We better get off. Better get off that, Rory, having far too much fun on the podcast. We now go into that focus on self, where we recognise that we are the heart of our practice and managing our personal relationships, Rory.
Yes, and this is something that comes up in our Facebook page so often. And if you're not a member of our Facebook page, why aren't you, is what I would say. And if you go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor with, as Ken said, 2 L's, you'll find us, we're a closed group, but our loving, wonderful moderation team will let you in, and you can join the conversation with thousands of qualified counsellors, students who are on their practice journey, supervisors, lecturers, and a whole debate about counselling is going on. And one of the big topics that I've noticed, a hot topic, as they say, was, is it true that when you go to do certainly the diploma in counselling, which is the practice-based element, it could be a degree, it could be a master's degree, but what I'm saying is when you step up to do the actual placement practice, it does hot up in terms of your own personal development. And people are saying, is it true that it's called a divorce diploma? And I was sat thinking about this, and I can remember, and I can still see it in my mind's eye now, sitting in that corner room in Hyde in Greater Manchester with my peers. There were 17 of us sat in that circle with the 2 tutors at the front. And it was in the 2000s, and I can remember a song by Oasis, and it's called Champagne Supernova, and it starts off by saying, how many special people change? How many lives are a little bit strange? Where were you when we were getting high? Now, of course, that's a narrative of people using drugs. But actually, I think it's a narrative of that you're in a special group that's changing.
Yeah. And
that your life's changing. And that the person who's with you wasn't with you. Where were you? Well, we were getting high, and I use the word high on education and learning and our own personal view of the world. And sadly, through the arc of that course, a lot of my peers separated because they had got, to use the kind of lyrical narrative, they got high. The world had opened up. They had seen the world differently, and more to the point, they'd seen how maybe their partners hadn't been treating them correctly, or they got the courage I think at least in one case, to leave an abusive partner. Yeah. They felt strong enough to be able to say, no more of this. And I think that when if you're going through, the diploma, you're going into the higher education, you're in that furnace of personal development, I think that relationships will change. I know I moved on from a lot of relationships during the arc of my training. And I had some dear friends. I had one who's not around now, who I loved very much, but at the end of my training, I didn't like very much, if that makes sense, Ken.
Total sense. It's an interesting journey, and it's a journey of personal self-development. The counselling training process is not, here's some theory in a book and here's some things that you say when people bring you their stories. It's about a focus on self. And when we look at self deeply enough, we start to learn who we are. And we start to maybe embrace parts of ourselves that may have been unacceptable to self before. And there's growth in that. And if you look at any of the kind of theoretical models that underpin that self-development relationship, they kind of indicate that there's a moving forward and we become a different person. in that we will see the world differently. I love, Rory, that you said the courage to, because that's another muscle that is developed during the arc of counselling training, is the muscle of courage. And it needs to be, because you need to be pretty courageous to be out there on the front line with people bringing their hardships, their sorrow, their emotional journeys. You need to be pretty robust, and going out takes an element of courage just to face that, just to face the stuff that's going on within your own life. And sometimes with that new perspective and with the courage to back that up, there is kind of a place that you get to where you go, no, this is not good enough. This isn't tolerable anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And that can be really tricky for those around us and the person going through it. When you reach those realizations, it can be pretty hard. When you reach a realization that, this is not a friendship I want to be in anymore. This is not a marriage I want to be in anymore. This is not a job I want to do anymore. With that comes pain, and there's the courage now. What are you going to do about it? And you exercise that courage from the change within to move on to a different stage. And that's what we see, not just in during the time of studies, but often post-study as well. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon. I recognized it within my own life. There was a day where I walked into my job, into my employer, and I walked into the managing director, and I took my car keys and I put them down on his desk, and I said, "That's me. I am done. I'm done with this. I'm not going to do it anymore." And I had no job to go to. It wasn't now that I had the follow-on plan. I just knew I couldn't do that anymore. I was compromising myself. And it was just something I have to do. I look back on that moment now, and it was one of the things I needed to do to be who I am today. But it took immense courage. I think the big courage was telling my wife that she just handed in my immediate notice. But it's an interesting and sometimes challenging journey as we grow.
It is, and where it's left me, someone from a working class background, is neither here nor there. I find myself, if I go back home and see the people I used to, I find myself in a different place to them, because I changed. And I don't particularly fit into like a middle class bubble either, whatever a middle class bubble is. So I just kind of navigate my way in between, and life is good. But you Ken, I found myself not being able to laugh with the crowd when they were telling certain jokes, or they were being offensive. And of course, it does. What happened with me, it does kind of point you out. Why aren't you laughing? You used to laugh at that joke. Well, I just don't think it's funny anymore.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of relationships where, quite frankly, the party was over, and I had to go, and they were confused about it. They were upset because I'd changed. That they were saying, "You're not." This particular person used to call me Oaksy. "You're not the Oaksy that I used to know." And I said, "Because I'm not the Oaksy that you knew."
Yeah.
And that was really, really, really hard. And I tell you what, I'm eternally grateful for through that 2-year arc of training, was that within the personal development groups, I got to meet the other. I met predominantly, it was our groups, as counselling groups tend to be. My observation through both being in one and training, predominantly women, and I met a lot of women on a level that I'd never met before, if that makes sense. And I got an insight into their lives and realized, gosh, just how my life as a man was completely different as their experience of being a woman.
Yeah. And
that was a very sobering moment as well. And and there were someone on the course, and I met them at a relational level, and I learned about their experiences of being male. So I think I think you do change. I think, how many lives are a little bit strange? Well, gosh, if you're a counsellor, they don't get much stranger, I don't think.
Yeah.
And special people do change. And I would say if anybody's going through that, if you're a listener and you're going through that now, just embrace it, because it's the arc of you becoming who you want to be. You're taking control of your life. You're being the person you want to be. You're not working to that condition of worth or that introjected value. That is organismic growth.
It is. And
in a nutshell.
And I love it. I love it. And we experience growing pains. When I was a lad, I used to get these pains in my bones, and my dad used to say, "Oh, they're growing pains." I don't know what they were, but that's what he said, and maybe they are, and maybe they're not. I'm not medically trained. But there's certainly growing pains when you experience personal and self-development. And I love, Rory, that you said, you weren't able to laugh with the rest of the crowd anymore at certain things that are inappropriate. And, part of that is a wanting to fit in at one stage in my life. When I look back, I wanted everyone to like me. It was important that they liked me, because I valued myself by how other people saw me. And if they liked me, then I was all right. If they didn't like me, then, I got to win them over. And I would laugh at stuff that I thought was maybe inappropriate. Not anymore. You get to the point where you have the courage, and not just the courage to not laugh at it, Rory. And I know from some of your stories you've shared with me from your own personal development, it's not just the not laughing, it's the saying, I think that's highly inappropriate, and telling them, pointing it out, saying, I don't like that. Yes. And being courageous in the world, standing up for those that are not there to stand up for themselves, where they're being oppressed by somebody verbally or whatever that may be, or downspoken. The tolerance runs out. The tolerance runs out, and we become more in service of others who might not be there, and kind of fighting little battles as we go. And that doesn't make for popularity. And the interesting thing is, it's all about acceptance that this is who I am now. And there will be people who will like that in me, and there will be people who do not like that in me, because I'm now being my truer self. I don't know that I'm yet my true self, Rory. I think that I'm still on that journey. I'm still knocking bits off myself and finding my real self underneath. And that's why that arc of personal development is a lifetime journey. If people do not accept me for who I truly am, then, that relationship is not meant to be. I'm not going to be someone else for them. And that's the courage again. You stop being someone else so that people will like who you are, or that you conform to their version of what they want as a friend, as a family member. And it becomes difficult when it's family. It becomes difficult when it's close. The work thing, I say it with a chuckle and a smile now, but I still have family relationships that I needed to walk away from, because they were toxic, and I wasn't happy to be in those relationships anymore. And that took some doing. But there's freedom on the other side.
It is. And for me, it was about living with myself. I'm just smiling to myself, because as you're saying that, Ken, I think of another Oasis song. You've got to be yourself. You can't be no one else. And of course, that's the absolute truth of the matter. You've got to be yourself. And I certainly lob branches off my relational tree. And my students used to talk about this. Our students used to talk about this, and they used to talk about kind of pruning the tree, pruning relationships that were damaging. And I certainly pruned some significant relationships from my life. Yeah. One in particular, where I realized that if I carried on down this road, it would not only be damaging for me, it would be damaging for my family. And, as Maya Angelou famously said, without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue with consistency. Yes. And I cut that limb off. And as with any limb that you cut off, it was mightily painful, I can tell you, but off it came for the greater good. And so if you are listening to this and this is resonating with you and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I would say to you, just stick with it, because the person you'll come out at the other end with will have changed. It's the nature of the work we do, and you will continue to refine and change and carve yourself, to use a woodworking analogy, into the person you want to be.
I love it. And that is our focus on self. And I think that really focuses on very deeply onto self. We now move on to practice matters, where we look at elements that we may come across in practice. And today it's presentation. And Rory, you spoke to Michelle Harrison-Lee, who works as a psychosexual therapist. Interesting topic.
It's an interesting topic, and our intimate sexual and emotional lives are very much a part of, well, for most of us, who we are. And sometimes those need some support through therapy. Psychosexual therapy is a specialist kind of activity and topic. And I spoke to a real specialist in psychosexual therapy who has done a fabulous lecture for our Counsellor CPD library, Michelle Harrison-Lee. And this is what she had to say.
Practice matters.
And we welcome Michelle Harrison-Lee, who's done a fabulous lecture for the Counselor CPD library on psychosexual counselling. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for having me, Rory, and inviting me to do the lecture.
Well, it's lovely to meet you. And the lecture that you delivered is on psychosexual counselling. So I guess my first question, Michelle, is what is psychosexual therapy?
So psychosexual therapy is a branch of psychotherapy that is focused on looking at sexual difficulties and sexual disorders. So people may come to psychosexual therapy because they have medical problems, they have self-esteem problems, they have relationship problems, but everything will kind of focus around their sexual lives and their sexual activities. Obviously, I don't work with the medical side. So when somebody has something that's maybe as a result of some kind of surgery or a hormonal difficulty or something organic, I can't prescribe a medication or anything like that, but certainly we can walk alongside people and either the aftermath of certain conditions. When it's more psychological, I think a big part of psychosexual therapy is performance anxiety, and people overthink things. They become very fixated on performance, and this can immobilize them. And so we're looking at things like self-esteem. We're looking at things like body image, and very much a big modality that we use in PST is CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, to look at the negative thinking and see if there's some kind of possibility of changing a mindset. And lastly, of course, relational. So, when we think about basic drives, we all have a longing to connect. So when, somebody presents with a sexual difficulty within their relationship, we invite the partner, and obviously there's a lot of assessment that's done between the couple to look at whether this is a viable option for them. I mean, people sometimes get very confused between what couple counselling is and what psychosexual therapy is. I always say that usually when people come to couple counselling, the relationship, for whatever reason, there's a conflict of interest. and the couple are not happy or they are dissatisfied with the relationship in some way, and therefore as a contributing factor, it might be that this is affecting their sex lives as well. Whereas with psychosexual therapy, PST, the relationship has to be good enough. It's most certainly what I would call a positive psychology, whereby sex is, considered a good thing to do. Yes. It's a fun thing to do. So obviously there's quite a long assessment process. It's not something that we just go straight into task setting and sex therapy. They would have to have an initial assessment and then individual assessments after that, just to see that there are no inhibitors, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've painted a really clear picture of what PST is, and also the kind of presentations that people might present with. And one of the things that I've always been fascinated with is that I wonder, in the age of the internet and media and this idealization of sex, does that put pressure on people to kind of live up to this kind of idealized idea of what sex should be and what the performance of sex should be?
Well, I think you're very right there, that we're very much governed by social media today in a way that it's never been as it has been before. And people watch, television, they watch pornography. It's, one click away, it's at our fingertips. And people use this as education about sex. And the problem being, I think with social media about how we should be looking and what we should be doing can be incredibly unrealistic and misinformative. So I do think that we're, when people come to psychosexual therapy, a big part of the work is going right back to the beginning and learning, how to create a erotic moment, how to flirt, how to be romantic, how to enhance desire.
Yes. Yes.
But there's an awful big part about, that we're all entitled to have a sex life. We all don't have to be bold and beautiful. Many of my clients, people of my age, may have had to cope with illness, surgery. They're recovering from certain treatments, whereby sex can be very, very healing, but not in the way that it's portrayed on the television. Nobody goes into a romantic scene of hot sex saying, "Well, I'm really sorry, I've just had surgery, and can you just be very careful not to."
Yes, of course. Of course. So there's something about the realistic aspects of having a sexual life and a sexual function, and would a sex therapist try to mediate that to try and give the reality of what that might look like?
Yes, of course, because if you've had some kind of medical condition or surgery, and it can very abruptly bring to an end all of those romantic notions. And as you recover, a year in, 2 years in, you get back to your old self again, and you want to learn to have intimacy, but it might not be in the same way that it was.
Mm.
So we're finding a different way to be intimate, and that doesn't have to be inclusive of orgasm or intercourse. There are other ways we have erogenous zones all over the body, and we need to kind of find them and discover them in different ways.
Yes, and I think you've really hit on something that's interesting. How we perceive what a sexual life and a sexual experience is. It doesn't have to be orgasm, and it can be so many different things. Intimacy and erotic engagement can be so.
We have erogenous zones all over the body. The soles of the feet. Around our temples, our ears, our backs, but it's a somatic experience. It's a body experience. So PST is about tuning in, rather than performance anxiety is about tuning out. It's wondering what other people will think about us. And what we try and do is get people to tune in. The most important person to worry about what you think is you, and to, that we do an awful lot of breath work and mindfulness so that people can, get in touch with their sensations and their feelings. It can be very moving and, and quite spiritual for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it strikes me as you're speaking, Michelle, that this isn't something that we're taught. We kind of, I don't to use the wrong metaphor, but it's kind of like on the job training, isn't it, with sex and intimacy, and we learn as we go along, and sometimes we might need help with that education. We might need someone to help us and help communicate what partners want. And would that be a work of a psychosexual therapist to tease out what, in terms of couples work, what the desires?
So again, not all psychosexual therapists have training in couple counselling. So, it's not to say this is my way. And certainly for me, I was a couple counsellor long before I was a psychosexual therapist. And obviously in couple counselling, we look, of course, at attachment styles, attachment patterns, that the way that we love sits in our early childhood experiences. And that for me as a therapist would be very, very important, because, intimacy, love and affection for me is a big part of psychosexual therapy.
Yes.
And I think that, some people, if they have very difficult upbringing, some people, obviously this is a theory, it's not, a science, find it very hard they can find it very easy to have sex, but, very hard to be intimate and affectionate with their partners.
Yes.
So, obviously, again, with couple counselling, to a certain degree, you can work with a very conflictual couple. Obviously, we don't work with domestic violence. That's a specialist field, and that goes somewhere else. With PST, again, the relationship has to be good enough, so they're good friends. They work well together. They are happy to collaborate together. And hopefully, we bring some kind of intimacy in. To begin sex therapy, the ironic thing is there is no sex.
Yes.
But there is creating an environment that is, conducive to creating an erotic moment.
Yes. Yes. I think you've painted a very clear picture of the work of a psychosexual therapist. And I'm curious, in your lecture, what do you hope people will go away with? What do you think they can be able to apply into their practices?
Well, first of all, I think it's a constant learning curve. You the more you research, the more you read, the more you do your courses, it leads you further and further and further into more learning. And I think that as counsellors, as therapists, it's an incredible journey. It's such a huge learning curve. So I think it's an exciting thing to think about. What I also like about psychosexual therapy is, as I said, it's a positive psychology, and it's far more directive. And again, I'm very aware that a lot of our core training is person-centered. So obviously, to have that active listening and to be empathic is very, very important. But you do have to be a lot more directive and, looking maybe at using your curiosity, questioning with a quest. There's in CBT, Socratic questioning is the cornerstone of the active listening. So we have to to ask people about their experiences, what they notice, how it affects them. And I think that's quite hard if you come from a more kind of humanistic background or a person-centered background, because you are looking for feedback.
So it sounds to me like part of what people take away is that psychosexual therapy is more active directive than maybe traditional Rogerian therapy, and that there's a huge amount of learning within that. There's certainly a lot of maybe taught or experiments carried out, people going away and trying things and coming back and seeing how it is.
Homework tasks. And it might be that for the client to begin with, they want to get it absolutely right. But kind of what I say to clients is prepare to fail or fail to learn. You are going to get it. And the reason why the tasks are set so frequently is not because we're expecting people to have sex frequently. Is what we're expecting is actually that they may fail the tasks. And so the quicker you do another one, the easier it is to recover.
Yes.
So yes. So,
well, I'm sure that those who watch the lecture will take away a huge amount of information, may apply it to the practice, may go on to train as psychosexual therapists. So Michelle Harrison-Lee, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you to our guest, Michelle Harrison-Lee. Thank you, as always, Rory, to you for hosting that interview. And of course, if you're interested in this topic of psychosexual therapy and you'd like to hear the entire lecture delivered by Michelle Harrison-Lee, well, that is available in our Counsellor CPD library. If you remember, log in. It is there waiting for you. If you're not yet a member of the Counsellor CPD library and you're interested in learning more, go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is there. This has been episode 212 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Well, yes, it has. We started off with Counselling Foundations and the Skill of Summarising. We moved on to Focus on Self and talked about managing relationships during the arc or the journey of training. And finally, we talked to Michelle Harrison-Lee, a psychosexual therapy, who talked about working with clients in areas of intimacy, sexual performance, and also relationships. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.